Chapter 3, The Bargain. Caroline was half convinced they would all three die in the woods and their bodies would not be found until spring. Beth was so tired of going up and down hills and jumping across creeks and climbing over fallen trees that she seemed to be listing to one side rather dangerously. It was also growing dark sooner than they had thought. "I think we should just all lie down beside each other with our arms folded over our chests and die peacefully," Caroline said. "I think you've got rhubarb where your brains should be," Eddie scolded. "Quit whining. You too, and turn on the flashlight." Beth got out the flashlight. It shone on the path ahead, and the trees loomed. "We could all write a farewell note to Mom and Dad and tell them to give our possessions to the orphans," said Caroline. Eddie wheeled around. "Caroline, will you just hush? You're not helping things a bit." "Well, I don't see any point in going any farther when we don't know where we are," Beth said. "We lost the boys a half hour ago, so we might just as well camp here. It's almost dark, and we're starved." "Listen," Eddie said suddenly. Caroline listened so hard she felt her ears were growing, but all she could hear was her own pulse throbbing in her head. And then, far, far away, she heard voices. "Voices," Beth confirmed. "Are you sure they're human voices?" Caroline asked. "It could be animal voices. What do raccoons sound like?" They remained very still and listened again. It sounds like singing," Beth said. "It is singing," Eddie declared. "It's 99 bottles on the wall. The boys!" It took almost 15 minutes more to get the place where they could see the tent. First, the singing seemed to be coming from one direction. Then the wind changed and it seemed to come from another. Beth got her foot caught in a vine, and they had to take her shoe off to get her foot loose. Then it took several more minutes to find the shoe. By that time, the singing had stopped altogether, but Caroline caught sight of a light, a little circle of light, and finally they could hear the river and make out the beam of the flashlight from inside a small tent. "Bingo," said Eddie. "Okay, let's make camp." Lying on the bed of leaves in the daytime was a lot more pleasant than lying on a bed of leaves in the dark was going to be. With no tent over them, Caroline decided. As the girls spread out their sleeping bags beneath the trees, Caroline wondered about wild animals. Are there bears in West Virginia?" she whispered. "Cut it out, Caroline." "Well, are there?" "If there are bears in West Virginia, they're way up in the mountains," Eddie said. Caroline knew that Eddie didn't know what she was talking about any more than Beth knew about bears, but she didn't ask any other questions because she didn't really want to know the answers. She unzipped her sleeping bag, took off her shoes, and crawled in. "Who's going to steal their clothes?" Beth whispered. "I am, as soon as I'm sure they're asleep." Caroline scrunched down as far as she could into her sleeping bag, feeling secure with Eddie on one side and Beth on the other. Within minutes, Beth began her noisy sleep that sounded like a motorcycle revving up. And then Caroline could tell from Eddie's slow, measured breathing next to her that she had fallen asleep as well. How could this be? Caroline laid with her eyes wide open. They had come all this way to steal the boys' clothes, and Eddie was asleep? She was just about to poke her and remind her of her obligations when she remembered the poncho she had brought along, and Agent XOX. Wasn't it she herself who should be the spy, the scout, the secret agent creeping through the trees, slithering along the ground, and stealing the boys' clothes? "Caroline did it again," her sisters would say. Reeling back out of the sleeping bag, she put on her sneakers and picked up the flashlight. She pulled the poncho over her, and then, like a small teepee moving around the ground, she set out softly for the boys' tent. The boys, she figured, would have taken off their clothes and thrown them at the foot of their sleeping bag, or perhaps wadded them down between their sleeping bag and the side of the tent. If she could just slip her hand underneath, perhaps she could pull the clothes out from under the edge without having to open the flap. Unless, of course, the tent had a canvas floor. She turned off the flashlight when she reached the tent. Like fingers searching out the key of the piano, Caroline's fingers inched their way beneath one side. She was in luck, no floor. She lay down on her stomach and extended her arms, her fingers exploring inside the tent. There was something there, all right. A jacket? Or was it a sleeping bag she was feeling? She couldn't see a thing, of course, because the poncho was slipped down over her face. Now her hand touched something else, and her fingers ran along the edge, something warm. Somebody's pajamas? Yipes! There was a yell from inside the tent. She tried to pull her hand back, but someone had grabbed it. Another yell, a bleat, a bellow, a hand! Josh! Jake! Caroline rolled over, struggling hard to pull her arm loose, but someone was pressing it to the ground. Pushing the poncho off her face, Caroline could see the beam of a flashlight inside the tent, see the jiggling of the canvas as the boys tumbled around, and then the tent flap opened and out they spilled. "It's Caroline!" yelled Josh. "They found us!" They found us? They knew? Whoever was inside the tent holding her arm let loose to come outside, and as soon as she was free, she struggled to her feet but tripped on the long poncho and fell to her face again. The boys laughed and yelled. More footsteps, running footsteps. Caroline could hear Eddie's voice trailed by Beth's. Somebody had hold of her feet and was pulling her toward the river. Was Agent XOX to drown a dying death? "You let go of her," came Eddie's voice, and suddenly Eddie had one arm, Beth the other, and they were pulling her this way and that. Back and forth, back and forth. She was going to die a stretching death inside, torn limb from limb. "Keep hanging on and we'll throw you all in," Jake yelled. And then Peter's voice wailed sleepily, "Wally, come back in. It's freezing." In that instant, Eddie and Beth yanked Caroline free, and finally Caroline was on her feet again, half running, half stumbling back into the underbrush beside her sisters. They sat on top of their sleeping bags while the boys hooped some more and shone the flashlight on them. "They don't even have a tent!" exclaimed Peter. "Hey, you girls lost?" Jake's voice came. "You cold? What are you looking for? A blanket?" "You want any directions? Just ask us. We'll direct you right into the river." "Yeah, who asked you to come on the camping trip?" "You don't own these woods. You don't own this river. We have as much right as you do here," Eddie screamed. "Ha! You wouldn't have even found your way out here if you hadn't followed us. We saw you sneaking along, hiding behind the bushes. We knew you were behind us the whole time." Caroline felt her face burning. How embarrassing to know that the boys had known they were back there all the time. Josh and Jake were laughing again, shining the flashlight. "Oh, Caroline, sneaking over here in that poncho. You look like a witch, Caroline." "They're all witches," declared Josh. "They don't even need to dress up for Halloween. Just come as they are, and they'll scare the little kids." The boys laughed some more. "Hey, girls," cried Jake, "what are you going to be for the Halloween parade?" "What Halloween parade?" Caroline called. If there was any dressing up in costume to be done, she wanted to know about it. "The school parade," yelled Wally. "We and the Bensons won first prize almost every year." "Well, whatever we think of, it'll be a lot better than what you wear," Beth retorted. "You wish. We'll win again, won't we, Wally?" "Sure we will." "You want to bet?" Eddie yelled. "You must feel you own this town. You must think you're going to go on winning the prizes and hogging the best camping spots just because you lived here first. Well, I'll tell you something, wise guys. Maybe you won't. Maybe somebody else will win this year." "Keep dreaming," called Josh. Caroline was beginning to shiver. The air seemed cooler than it had when they started out. But Eddie was angry, and when she was angry, she was unstoppable. "You want to bet?" she yelled again. "Sure, bet. Whichever group wins first prize, you or us, will be the masters, and the other group will be the slaves." Were they crazy? No one would agree to— "You're on," Eddie yelled. "Deal." "Eddie, are you nuts?" "They think they're so smart," Eddie spluttered. Caroline had never seen Eddie so angry. "What will the slaves have to do?" Caroline called out. "Whatever the masters tell them to do." There seemed to be a brief discussion going on in the boys' camp. Then Wally replied, "The slaves have to do all the master's work for a whole month." "Fine with us," yelled Eddie. "Eddie, if they win, They won't. We will," Eddie said. "We have to." Caroline let out her breath. She was too tired to argue anymore. All she wanted was her warm sleeping bag and a soft place to lay her head. She had just started to crawl in when suddenly, splat! Caroline looked around. Another splat. "Rain!" cried Beth and Eddie. The girls quickly rolled up their cotton sleeping bags, sat on top of them and spread out the poncho over their heads while the boys hooped again and tumbled back into their tent. The rain came down harder and harder. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, on and on. All around them, the ground was getting soggy and spongy. A damp earth smell arose from the floor of the forest. Caroline felt like a mushroom. She smelled like a mushroom. She imagined that she had little bugs crawling up one side of her stalk and down the other. The food was gone. The water was almost gone. Caroline needed to go to the bathroom, but she didn't want to get rained on, so she stayed where she was and felt miserable. It was all such a dumb idea, following the boys out here to steal their clothes. They hadn't even taken their clothes off. Some come to think of it, and neither had she or her sisters. "Hey, girls," came a yell from the riverbank. "You gonna stay there and get wet? Why don't you find your way home? Are you sleeping bag soggy?" Caroline could hear her teeth chattering, or maybe it was Eddie's or Beth's. For a while, none of them moved. None of them spoke. The rain drummed on the poncho over their heads, and Caroline was sure that by morning it would have driven them all mad. None of them spoke. They were too disgusted and angry. And then, after a long while, Eddie murmured, "Wait till Halloween." And she said it with conviction.